Most likely, some of these people who express fears about being around transgender people have probably been around transgender people and have shared spaces with transgender people. They just might not have known it.
It was somebody from Washington, D.C. who had never spoken to me, had to Google who she was, as I got this. And I was like, cool, so this is disingenuous, and this is arbitrary, and this is not on performance. This is across-the-board termination.
The thing that has to happen first, before we take any policy initiatives, is we have to change hearts and minds, and we have to basically uncover the history, a history that's been lost and obscured. Just the idea that Jim Crow was regional is basically what most people think, and it wasn't. Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET-FM. I'm Tia Graham. And it feels as though scandals in Detroit, they just keep happening. Last week, a federal judge sentenced the former chief financial officer of the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy to 19 years in prison. His name is William Smith, and he had been taking millions of dollars from the nonprofit for 12 years. Ultimately, he embezzled $44 million from the organization during that time. That's a lot of money. The Riverfront Conservancy is a pretty prominent organization. It's responsible for all the changes along Detroit's Riverwalk. There is a board of directors, and audit, and financial officers. So how did one man manage to dodge accountability? And why does misconduct keep happening in Detroit? We do want to hear from you. In addition to prison time, William Smith is expected to pay $48 million in restitution. What do you think about that sentencing? Was justice served in this case? The phone lines are open, 313-577-1019, and let us know what you think. Joining me now to talk a little bit more is Violet Ikonova. She is an investigative reporter at the Detroit Free Press. She's covering this story and can provide some valuable insight into how this could have happened in the first place. Violet, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Of course. So let's first lay down the foundation by identifying what William Smith's role was. The Riverfront Conservancy has been responsible for re-envisioning the Riverwalk in Detroit. Talk about how important this work was for the city.
Yeah, so 20 years ago, the Riverfront was largely an unwalkable warehouse district. The Conservancy has revamped that whole strip along the water side from about the Ambassador Bridge to the MacArthur at Belle Isle. And we know this area as the Riverwalk. How important the work is, depends on who you ask, but millions of people go to the Riverwalk and the adjoining spaces like the DeQuinder Cut every year. Now, it is an entirely public zone, so there's no commercial over there, which is very rare and very applauded by some folks. So a lot of people love the Riverwalk. There was talk of putting a casino district at one point way back in the day there, which would have been revenue generating for the city. But the Riverwalk has also claims to have brought spin-off economic development. Or the Riverfront Conservancy. So that's the Riverfront Conservancy. And Smith joined the organization in 2006 as a financial analyst, and he was promoted to CFO in 2011 and started stealing shortly thereafter.
Wow. Where did the Riverfront Conservancy get its money from, and how much money does it receive annually?
So the Riverfront Conservancy started around the early 2000s. I think it was 2003. GM kicked off the initial investment in rebuilding the Riverwalk with $25 million as it moved its headquarters over to the RenCen. Now, the Riverfront Conservancy was really Matt Cullen's brainchild. He's the founding chair. He was at the time the head of infrastructure at GM. And then Kresge kicked in another $50 million. And from there, the city saw massive investment happening at a scale that was not at all happening back then in Detroit, and started giving money in terms of giving value in terms of, public infrastructure upgrades in that zone. So this is a very well-funded organization, and that was just the beginning times. This is a very well-funded organization that the contributions for it and its work come from public, private, philanthropic, and it had $169 million in assets in 2022, which is very, very high for a local nonprofit. I mean, this is one of the region's top and largest nonprofits.
And, a natural question that comes up, Violet, in this conversation is how Smith was able to do this and was able to do it for so long. I mean, this is a 12-year span, over a decade, and we've been in search of answers to this question. First, what kind of access did he have to the organization's finances? Was no one else double-checking what was happening?
Well, that's the thing that has never been revealed. I talked to nonprofit. Basically, well, let me just go back a step. Smith, as the CFO, had a hand in all things financial. So every check going in and out, from what I understand, he would have needed to have signed off on them. But every check requires 2 sign-offs. So that would have had to have been him and another person. So that part is unclear. There are other ways that the Conservancy says he covered up the theft and prevented folks from being able to detect the fraud. But basically, in his role, Smith had access to the Riverfront Conservancy's bank accounts, sole control to one, which has been flagged as a giant problem. That's not supposed to be happening at any nonprofit, which ultimately allowed for the theft. The prosecutors and the Conservancy's attorneys have laid out a really complicated kind of scheme, but basically he moved money from the main Conservancy bank account that he had primary control to the lesser used Conservancy checking account that he had sole access to. And from there, he moved the money to a personal LLC he created the year after becoming CFO. And he also moved the money to pay several lines of credit he opened. And there was allegations, that money was going to a lot of people in his orbit, the best woman or the best man at his wedding, his wife, his mother, his sister, a mistress. And then on top of doing the stealing, the Conservancy started to face a cash shortfall at some point within the past couple of years. And at that point, to cover up the shortfall that he had created, he fraudulently, he misrepresented himself and took out a loan for $5 million from a bank for the Conservancy to cover up what he was doing. And there's way more details, right? Like he was doctoring financial reports to pull this off. Basically, the Conservancy's lawyer has said he created 2 sets of books that never allowed the board to know what was going on with the finances of the nonprofit. And he hid his behavior in other ways, too. Like, for instance, he never let his personal assistant open his mail. And one day when she tried to organize his files and he wasn't there, he started swearing at her. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. And there's so many questions I have just off of that alone. But I do want to ask about those who were responsible for checking in and figuring out what was going on with the money when they did initially find out that there was something amiss happening within the budget. Who else could have been, I guess you can say, responsible for this missing money?
Yes, this is, no one else has been charged. Mm-hmm. So, however, a nonprofit is supposed to be governed and overseen by its board. And this is the fundamental question in this case for me, because I'm a watchdog kind of investigative reporter, is this is a board unlike many others. Well, this is a very high-powered board. It has 44 members. To name a few, we've got Detroit City Council President Mary Sheffield, now running for mayor. Matt Cullen, as I mentioned before, the founding chair, a businessman, an extremely high-profile businessman who was for a long time the right-hand man to Dan Gilbert. So it did raise questions, and I cannot tell you how many reader emails I got, how did none of these people notice what was going on? Now, as we just heard, they say they were never getting an accurate picture of the finances. But we did start looking at broader issues within the organization and soliciting feedback from nonprofit experts. And basically, they said the nonprofit looked like it had its guard down. So they highlighted really cozy relationships between the board and its staff. There should be a firewall between these entities in an ideal world to ensure oversight. These guys were hanging out together, calling each other friends. I mean, maybe not hanging out regularly, but, there are photos of them together on the internet, calling each other friends. One board member runs an investment firm that gave Will Smith a loan to create a cigar bar near the riverfront that he called discretion. So these relationships are, I don't want to use the word incestuous, but they're very cozy. Yeah. One local nonprofit of a much smaller scale, the head of it, she said it's the good old boys club. The good old boys saw one of their good old boys, they looked at him like a good old boy, and they let it happen. So there are some people with a different view of what potentially could have happened, and then there are other things that, another industry standard in the nonprofit sector is that an auditor should be switched out every few years. Where was the auditor in all of this is another question that has come up. The Riverfront Conservancy was contracting with the same auditor at least for a decade. I couldn't see further back, but possibly from the beginning of time of that organization. So. Yeah, a lot of layers to it.
I was going to say, Violet, that sounds as if it's not, it doesn't follow the normal practices that you were talking about or that you've seen within nonprofits. You're listening to The Metro. I'm Tia Graham. My guest is Violet Ikonomova. She is an investigative reporter for the Detroit Free Press. We are discussing how William Smith, the former CFO of the Riverfront Conservancy, was able to embezzle at least $44 million from the nonprofit for over a decade. He was just sentenced to 19 years in prison last week and ordered to pay $48 million in restitution. And we do want to hear from you all. Was justice served in this instance? Call in. Let us know. The phone lines are open. 313-577-1019. That's 313-577-1019. Now, Violet, Mark Wallace, who was the CEO of the organization, resigned around the time Smith was fired. Wallace was Smith's boss. Do we know what role he played in all of this?
Well, like I said, no one has been charged. There are not going to be any more charges for people, the federal government has said. So I don't know Wallace's role. I mean, what I've been told is that he should have been signing checks of over $500. How he missed this, I'm not sure. The thing that's key to know also is the way Smith was spending this money. Like $44 million in 12 years. Like, I don't know, as a layperson, and perhaps your listeners as well, I have no idea how to even begin to spend that amount of money. And we have learned how Smith was spending that money, and it was like on a $100,000 chartered yacht this week, on a $100,000 chartered private jet flight to Vegas this week, like $3.7 million in wire transfers to a mistress, $500,000 in floor seats to Pistons games. And this guy was making, in his day-to-day, he was making $200,000 a year on average since he became the CFO in 2011. So I don't know, did nobody see him courtside at all these, before the Pistons were in the playoffs, $500,000 in Pistons tickets would get you what, like 2 to 3 seasons of courtside?
I was going to say.
So there's a lot of, and I don't want to go on and on, but there are also he was involved in all these kind of high level business dealings too, that there was starting to be a paper trail in court records about these like bad restaurant deals that he'd invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in. One of his business partners was indicted on a separate fraud scheme.
Just really quickly, Violet, because I do want to jump in because you talked about those businesses, and something I've been harping on for a while within the newsroom is Duo Lounge, which was in Southfield. Now, he had a connection to Duo Lounge, if I'm mistaken. Okay. And that was a space that I frequented quite often, honestly. It was something that I loved. We would go off. It had live music. It was a nice vibe. And when I found out what happened and how he was connected to it all, it just sent me into a different type of anger and rage. So can we talk just a little bit about that? that you're talking about, the personal business ventures and some of the red flags that started to come to light, especially as he started to just make these deals.
Yeah, well, so Duo was actually never flagged as an issue because it looked like he just had a very successful bar on the side. Like if you Google Duo and if you look at Michigan, liquor sales, Duo was actually one of the top 5 establishments for liquor sales in the state year after year. So it kind of looks like he just has a really successful bar. But the prosecutors, so this didn't really raise much of a red flag. I guess if anything, if somebody knew he had a successful bar, a board member might be able to explain away, oh, okay, so he's courtside at Pistons game too. I mean, how you run a super successful bar on top of your full-time job is a whole other question that I haven't exactly raised with anyone, so I'm not going to speculate there. But the prosecutors have said that he laundered about $4 million through Duo. So spent what they allege he spent Riverfront Conservancy money on Duo. That's how it was so successful, including buying bulk liquor orders in the hundreds of thousands.
You see, when you tell me that, this is exactly the feeling that I felt when I heard about the funds and the misappropriation of funds. And I thought to myself, this is possibly something that I had a direct hand in as well, going to Duo. And it sent me in a different rage, Violet. It did.
I feel that, yeah.
But I do want to go to the phones right now. We have Ray from Detroit. Ray, thank you for calling the Metro today. What do you make of this case?
Justice has not been served. There's no way that one man can pull off that level of fraud with no one knowing what's going on. In particular, one of the largest nonprofits in this state. It's unbelievable that all those high-level board members, very high-level people, very important individuals, are allowed to get away without being questioned by the media. This is a catastrophe. This is not acceptable by Detroit people. It's not acceptable. Justice has not been served. No one man can get away with it. He's a fall guy for everybody.
Ray, thank you so much for calling today and expressing your thoughts and feelings about this case. And if he's been held accountable, William Smith has been held accountable for his actions, and if justice has been served, I do want to bring Violet into the conversation. What do you make of the claim that Smith is just the fall guy?
I mean, Smith very much did this, so I don't know if he's the fall guy. I would say that maybe there should be some accountability for people outside of Smith, depending on, how people want to mete out accountability. I mean, there have been changes. Mark Wallace had to go, obviously. That's a form of accountability. But William Smith very much took this money himself, that he was able to get away with it is certainly a problem, but I wouldn't call him a fall guy.
Yeah. And how, in your opinion, because you've been researching and following along with the story, how could he avoid getting caught for 10 plus years?
It was the doctoring. I don't want to do too much defending of these folks who really do need to be scrutinized, but there is a way where if everything they say is true of the doctoring of financial statements, I mean, that's a way to get away with it. And then once the cash shortfall hits, $5 million, he covers it up. He stopped getting away with it when the cash shortfall caught up with him in last March. And that was when board members noticed something was amiss, hit him up, couldn't reconcile, there were financial irregularities and everything he was showing them. And that's when they learned something was going on. So I guess, the kind of big picture, he was able to get away with it for so long because the Riverfront Conservancy had a lot of money. And it wasn't until it stopped having a lot of money in the day-to-day that it caught up with him. Yeah. And to me, it kind of begs the question of, this is just kind of a lofty question, but when we think about how philanthropy devotes money to the things that Detroit needs, should the riverfront, of all of the need in Detroit, should the public space of the riverfront have so much excess money on hand that something like this isn't detected for this long? Mm-hmm. And it kind of raises the question for me of, how are we allotting the limited resources that are in this city. I know philanthropic spending is for the rich and the charities to decide to do what they wish with, but for the riverfront to have had, I don't know, it's just a question for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of us all have so many questions surrounding the Riverfront Conservancy and the $44+ million that was embezzled. But ultimately, the money the Conservancy receives is for public spaces and the residents of the city of Detroit. Were any projects impacted by Smith's actions?
Yes, there is a project, their final project, a park that's going to go near the Ambassador Bridge. That is now delayed. But the thing is, they also, shortly after the theft was announced, philanthropies again stepped up to give them millions more to bridge the shortfall. So the riverfront is that park is expected to open this summer, and things it seems like are going to continue to go smoothly at the riverfront for the time being, based on what they have said.
And just based on what we've talked about right now, Violet, I do want to hear about what you've been hearing, just based on, like you said, reader feedback and those in the field that you've been able to speak with. What have they been saying about Smith and his actions, and if justice was served or not?
I have heard kind of mixed reviews. I mean, what's interesting about this case is, prosecutors only asked for 18 years for him, and the judge gave 19 years. That's how egregious this was believed to be. She made a really good case for how he was basically robbing and stealing from everyday Detroiters, and kind of situated him in the larger context of the city, which we very much shed not very much, but there has been a shedding of the reputation of corruption, the scale of the reputation that we had back in the Kilpatrick era. And so the Conservancy has argued, and she kind of made the case as well, that he has taken Detroit down reputationally. And the prosecution in the case also said, they don't even have analogs for this kind of theft of this scale for these reasons, which was seems like pure greed at this point. So there have been a lot of people who have said, good, this is great that they did this to him. But the consistent email I get is, what about everybody else? Somebody should have stopped this. But it does raise something that I think gets overlooked, and it is that in the nonprofit sector, we do not have the same safeguards that we have in the public sector. Yes, corruption has happened in Detroit in the public sector as well, but it has not happened on this scale. I have never seen a local embezzlement of $40 million within 12 years, $44 million within 12 years. And the nonprofit sector just doesn't have the same kind of accounting checks and balances, rules, reporting requirements of the public sector. And it raises yet another much larger question in Detroit, where because we have such a small tax base, we are incredibly reliant on philanthropic and nonprofit activity. And this should be a real reckoning moment. These organizations, and I think it has been, that they've all kind of been looking inward since this occurred. How do we prevent this sort of thing? And to the Riverfront's credit, they are coming up with a new way of doing things, a new set of best practices, industry-leading best practices, they say, to prevent this from ever happening again. And they hope it'll be a blueprint for other organizations.
Violet Ikonomova is an investigative reporter for the Detroit Free Press. Violet, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro and explaining this whole case to us.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Coming up on the Metro, we are going to continue this conversation about local corruption. We'll also look back and see how the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy scandal compares to some of the scandals of the past. And we also want to hear from you and hear your thoughts on this scandal. The former Detroit Riverfront Conservancy CFO was sentenced to 19 years in prison, and he is expected to pay the money back. Was justice served? The number is 313-577-1019. That's 313-577-1019. Stay right there. We'll be right back with the Metro. Metro on 1019 WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham. And former Chief Financial Officer of the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, William Smith, was sentenced to 19 years in prison for stealing $44 million from the organization. And we do want to continue the discussion about this scandal in the context of Detroit's history with misconduct in its leadership and ask why it keeps happening in Detroit. And we do want to hear from you. In addition to prison time, Smith is expected to pay $48 million in restitution. What do you think about this decision? Was justice served in this case? The phone lines are open, 313-577-1019, and let us know what your thoughts are. Joining us now to continue this conversation is John Gallagher. He is a journalist, author, and a longtime reporter for the Detroit Free Press. John, welcome back to the Metro.
Yeah, hi. Good morning. How you doing?
Doing pretty well. How are you?
Good. Thank you. Great discussion so far.
Thank you so much. And we would love to continue it with you. Of course, that's why we have you here today. So there have been a number of city officials who've engaged in some scandal over the years. I'm thinking of Monica Connors, who was indicted in 2009 for demanding money for city contracts. We have Gabe Leland, who was resigned in 2021 for misconduct, even as far back as former police chief William Hart. From the Coleman Young era, he went to prison for embezzling, $2.3 million from a secret police anti-drug fund. Detroit isn't the only city that has experienced local government scandals, but it can sometimes feel like Detroit is uniquely vulnerable. In your opinion, why are these scandals consistent through time here at the city of Detroit?
Well, just by way of illustration, I became a reporter in Chicago back in the 1970s, and I helped cover public corruption there. I spent a few years in Syracuse, New York, and upstate New York, and covered the mayor going to prison for public corruption there, and then came here, and as you said, Monica Conyers and Gabe Leland and Kwame Kilpatrick. So I really do think it's some problem throughout American history. Where, public officials in Washington, D.C., Boston, New York right now, Eric Adams is under investigation, the mayor of New York. Why? I mean, there's something about so much money flowing through, so much tax money flowing through government. Some people are more than willing to just grab what they can. And as Violet said, maybe we don't have the systems in place to catch it. Now, the problem with the Riverfront, as she pointed out, is that this is on a scale and a duration of time that dwarfs some of these others. I mean, Kwame Kilpatrick got caught relatively quickly. Monica Conyers got caught relatively quickly. But for this to go on for 12 years and at the scale of more than $40 million stolen really indicates that there was a failure. A massive failure at every level, from the board, from the staff of the Conservancy to the board to the outside auditors, even the foundations that are, usually demand pretty detailed reporting on what's happening with the money that they grant. I mean, I just think everybody sort of let this happen. So we've yet to hear more about that, but I really think it's just something endemic in our system of government.
Just in general, it's just something that's a symptom of our government and the United States of America. But I do want to stay on topic with former Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. It's the most notable scandal in Detroit political history, of course. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison for misconduct, bribery, and perjury, but was pardoned by President Trump 20 years early. So he did get out early. What were you hearing from folks about Kwame's sentencing at that time? Did people feel like justice was appropriately served?
Well, I think 28 years was a very long sentence. Interesting. I mentioned the mayor of Syracuse, New York. Lee Alexander went to prison in the 80s when I was covering that, and he got 10 years. And at the time, we thought, oh, my God, 10 years, that's the longest sentence we've ever heard for a public official. And then, Kwame gets 28. And I asked one of the prosecutors, what happened between the 25 years? The 10 years is an enormous sentence, and now 28. And I think there's just more of a willingness to confront white-collar crime, so-called victimless crime. I think, as the judge said in the Will Smith case, this guy's stealing from ordinary Detroiters, from all of us. I mean, this is not some guy who's just, taking money that doesn't belong to anybody. This is taking it out of everyone's pocket and really delaying the completion of the Riverwalk, which is one of the great things in the city. So,
and John, I
think there's a will.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do want to jump in here really quickly because I know we're going to get to kind of tight here with time, but I do want to say and talk about something that you said just a little bit earlier, which is that corruption is endemic to our local government here. I want to push on that a little bit. Chicago has been known as being corrupt, and corruption happens in many other cities across the country. Are you suggesting that Detroit is unique in terms of corruption that happens here? No, not at all. I think corruption happens there. Every city I've ever worked in, there's been public officials going to prison. Wow. And often, at the level of mayor, city council people, high level, it's not just some clerk who's lifting a little bit out of the till. These are public officials who are doing some pretty serious stuff. Now, I'm not suggesting all public officials are corrupt. I don't believe that for a minute, but there's always been, throughout American history, in city after city after city, there's been examples of people willing to steal from the public. And as I said, maybe they think because it's everybody's money, therefore it's nobody's money, so it doesn't matter if I, lift a little bit, whatever the attitude is. But I think it's been happening everywhere. There's a long history of public corruption, throughout American history. And John, I love that little tidbit there. Like you said, you don't know. You tried to figure it out yourself. Like, why does this happen at that level? And I'm asking to you a personal question, but do you think it's because they're so close to the power, they're so close to the money that it's just right there and easy for the picking?
Yeah, I think the fact that it's public money, and as I said, it's everybody's money, therefore it's nobody's money. You're not stealing from your neighbor or your friend. You're stealing from some vague, amorphous, public. It's in the till. There's always more tax money where that came from. With the stealing from the Conservancy, this is tens of millions of dollars from these foundations that are worth billions of dollars. Hey, it doesn't matter if I lift a little bit. I'm speculating now about some of the motives here, but I think the fact that it's white collar crime, that it doesn't get punished very often. A lot of people get away with it, whether it's stealing pencils or stealing millions of dollars. Yeah. And I think people just feel like it's not a big deal. And it's like I said, it's public money, so therefore nobody's going to miss it. I think that's some of the attitude that must be behind some of this stuff.
Yeah. You're listening to The Metro. I'm Tia Graham. My guest is former Free Press reporter John Gallagher. We're discussing the history of scandals in Detroit amid the Riverfront Conservancy scandal. The nonprofit's former chief financial officer was sentenced to 19 years in prison for stealing at least $44 million from the organization. And I do want to go back to the phone lines now. We have Ann in Detroit. Ann, do you believe justice was served in the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy CFO case?
Oh, thank you so much for taking my call. I'm a business person in Detroit, and I'm going to try to do this quickly. The procedure in place for placing certain levels of males of color in society at that level is minuscule, for one. So when they do get them in there, I think they become very comfortable in a capacity that most people would not even experience at all. And I'm not trying to say he was the one and done that got in, but that's basically what it was. He's the one and done that got in. And I don't know how he and Mark interacted. I think they had good chummy relationship going on. But I do know the bigger picture is that there is something wrong with
Ann, I'm so sorry. I do have to cut you out. I want to say thank you so much for giving us a call. That's Ann from Detroit. And John, I want to bring you back in. We got about 30 seconds, John. Do you think William Smith's prosecution will hurt the chances for other black leaders to get their shot? Because Ann was trying to get to that point there. We've seen our black leaders like Kwame Kilpatrick and now with William Smith, and they are black men in prominent roles. So can you just talk a little bit about that briefly?
Sure. Well, we have, eight or nine people running for city council and multiple people running for governor and Senate and Congress. I don't think it's going to prevent other people from stepping forward, and I hope it doesn't. I hope the public doesn't become too cynical. We just have to set up the procedures that are going to prevent this and not just catch the guys after the fact, but prevent this kind of corruption from happening in the first place.
Yeah. Nicely said. John Gallagher is a journalist, author, and former reporter of over 30 years with the Detroit Free Press. John, as always, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
You bet. My pleasure. Thank you.
The Metro is hosted by Robin Vincent and Tia Graham. The show is produced by Sam Corey, Kerry Jr. II, and Jack Philbrand. Our senior producer is David Lyons. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music and creative audio production by Sam Bobian. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is 1019 WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.